Good morning, good afternoon or good evening, depending on what time of the day you're listening to this presentation. My name is Michelle Dow and I'm one of the service managers within housing. I have probably met many of you in person before, but if I haven't, or this is your first conference, then I look forward to seeing you in person soon. Normally, we would all be looking forward to the Summer Tenant Conference at the Salutation Hotel, but this has not been possible for obvious reasons this year. This presentation is in advance of our live tenant conference next week, and from our perspective, this new approach is one of the positives from our new ways of working, in that you have the opportunity to consider the information within the presentation at a time which suits you, and you can view it more than once, and hopefully send in some questions around our rent setting and our priorities. We thought in the first instance it would be useful to provide you with a quick overview of what this presentation will cover. So although this is about our rent setting approach and our rent levels, we thought it would be useful to have a quick look at what we've been doing and how we have changed the way we work throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. This will be a video clip which you can click on in the next slide. We will then spend the remainder of the presentation looking at our current rent levels, affordability, how we spend your rent money and involve you in the decision-making process, and then finally, what happens after this presentation. There can be no doubt about the impact COVID-19 has had on you as our tenants, your families and us as your landlord. We've all been in lockdown since March 2020 and we've only been able to deliver essential services to you, our tenants, throughout this period in line with Scottish Government guidance. Many of you may have experienced a loss of or reduction in income and an increased cost in your day-to-day living as you support the stay-at-home message. The lockdown has impacted on our new build delivery programme as a result of the closure of the construction industry. In addition, the move to emergency repairs only has meant many of you are having to wait for routine repairs to be completed, and we'll have a separate presentation on this next week at our live conference. We cannot thank you enough, as your landlord, for your patience and understanding during this difficult time for us all. This video clip gives you a flavour of what our frontline housing teams have been doing throughout lockdown.
It has been a year like no other for the Council's housing service and our tenants. When COVID-19 hit and the first lockdown began, we had to put all our normal work on hold and concentrate on making sure critical services were available to those who needed them most. Let's reflect on some of the work we have done over the last 12 months. Our housing staff carried out over 8,000 welfare telephone checks on tenants during lockdown to make sure everyone had the food and the medicine and support they needed. Our repair service carried out 3,800 emergency repairs on your homes during lockdown to keep them safe and weathertight. Our trades team rose to the challenge of working in these very different conditions brilliantly, and their effort were greatly appreciated by tenants who needed emergency work done. Between March and June 2020, our housing options and support team dealt with 3,300 inquiries from people who needed housing support or advice and arranged critical housing for over 90 people and families. Our private sector access team worked to find accommodation for another 55 households during lockdown. Our locality housing teams were set up with equipment so that they continue to provide vital support to tenants while working from home. Our locality team staff also stepped up to help out their communities when they needed them most. For example, staff from our North Locality Housing Office took over the running of the Blairgowrie Food Bank at the height of the pandemic to make sure vulnerable people in the local community continue to have a supply of food. And they delivered around 450 food parcels. Staff coordinated the community response to COVID outbreaks in their areas, such as the one at the Two Sisters in Cooperangis. They made sure people who were self-isolating had the food and support they needed. Sheltered housing staff carried out daily telephone welfare checks on tenants and spoke to them face-to-face at their doors at a social distance to keep them socially involved. All staff made sure tenants had the food, supplies, and medicine they needed. Some housing staff were redeployed to support other council services, such as waste services and social care, to make sure critical work could continue. Our program of new build homes had to be paused, but we were able to restart work at the end of June 2020. Earlier this year, we delivered 12 new council homes in Meagle. Major new council housing developments in Scone and Hunting Tower are also on track to be delivered this year. Our caretaking team worked on the front line through periods of lockdown and increased cleaning works in multi-story blocks to keep tenants and residents.
The video you've just watched hopefully gives you a flavour of how we have adapted as your landlord to continue to provide you with, wherever possible, support during this difficult time. As we speak, Perth and Kinross Council have been moved into Level 1 in accordance with the Scottish Government guidance. We wanted to let you know how we are working towards re-engaging with you as tenants as we move forward. The majority of our staff are still following the work from home guidance where possible. All of our frontline housing teams have been provided with the necessary equipment to allow them to fully work from home wherever possible. We will continue to follow the latest Scottish Government guidance in relation to changes to local authority levels. We've got plans in place for each of the Scottish Government guidance levels on what this means for service delivery across all areas of the service, ensuring that health, safety and well-being of both our tenants and our staff is at the heart of what we do, and that we can react quickly to any changes in the guidance. We need to look at the new ways of working we've introduced and learn from where this has had a positive impact on the way in which we deliver services and engage with tenants. We need to consider what additional training and support our staff will require to deliver the appropriate levels of service to our tenants, given the impact of COVID and the wider community. We need to look at how we can fully support our tenants to ensure they are digitally included. Do they have the right skills, equipment and confidence? And this is an area which was prioritised in our rent setting priorities for this year in terms of digital inclusion. We need to build on the Perth and Kinross offer on how we work with and true partnership our tenants and communities so that you feel enabled and empowered to influence decisions and change things for the better. As outlined earlier, the main focus of this presentation today is to engage with and listen to you, our tenants, around your priorities when it comes to spending your rent money and the levels of rent we charge. The next few slides, therefore, look at how our rent levels compare with both local and neighbouring providers, and a quick reminder about our affordability model. The first slide you're looking at compares our current average rent levels for this financial year with neighbouring local authorities. The neighbouring local authorities is based on an estimate, as we were unable at the point in time of pulling this information together to have confirmation of the final agreed rent increase for each individual authority. As you can see there on the bottom line, the average rent levels for Perth and Kinross Council are 7% lower than those of our neighbouring local authorities. This ranges across bedroom sizes from a minimum of 3% difference up to 21% for neighbouring local authorities in terms of bed sits. So we compare favourably in terms of councils who operate around our locality area. And I'm absolutely delighted to be able to say that we have just recently received confirmation that we've gone from being the 6th lowest local authority average rent to the 3rd lowest based on our 2021-22 rent levels. This slide provides you with an overview of our current average rent levels compared to registered social landlords who are operating within the Perth and Kinross area and who offer a genuine alternative housing option for residents in Perth and Kinross. As you can see there, if you look at the bottom line in terms of the average rent levels, Perth and Kinross rents are significantly lower than those of our registered social landlords who operate in the area, up to 29% on average. As you can see from the slide, this goes from a minimum of a rent level which is 25% lower for a 4-bedroomed up to 42% for a bed sit. When determining current and future rent levels, it is essential that we consider affordability for you, our tenants. 4 years ago, some of you may remember, we introduced our rent affordability modelling toolkit, which we've continued to look to enhance year on year as we listen to what's important to you as our tenants to allow us to understand this. There is no set guidance on what is considered to be an affordable rent. However, the Housing Needs Demand Assessment indicates that a tenant should not be spending more than 25 to 30% of their overall income on housing costs, although this is a simple total income calculation. Changes we've made from your feedback include looking at affordability, for example, for pensioners, and being able to drill down and recognise that larger households will have more outgoings and be spending more of their disposable income on housing costs. Again, we will look at this in more detail at the autumn conference once the new rent level options are proposed. However, it is probably important to highlight that our affordability toolkit was recognised as an example of good practice at a national conference. So how affordable are our rents? The table here shows you a range of income levels and how affordable PKC rents are compared to local authorities in the neighbourhood and registered social landlords. This table shows you the percentage of overall income that an individual household would be spending on their housing costs for each of the providers. And you can see there, Perth and Kinross ranges from 14 up to a maximum of 24%, whereas for other neighbouring local authorities it's 23 to 24%, and for other providers of social housing within Perth and Kinross it ranges from 27% up to 31%. The table underneath also shows that overall what percentage of residents can afford our rent levels without any assistance, for example through housing benefit or universal credit. And I'm delighted to say that in Perth and Kinross, based on our current rent levels, 86% of tenants can afford our rents compared to 82% for registered social landlords. As well as understanding how our rent levels compare nationally and in terms of affordability, it's also key that we let you know, as tenants, what we spend your rent money on. The graphic you're looking at here has been agreed with our tenants as being representative of what every penny in the pound we spend in terms of service delivery. The first blue house, repairs and maintenance, shows that for every pound spent, 31 pence is on repairs and maintenance. This includes both emergency and day-to-day repairs, voids to bring our properties up to lettable standard, adaptations to ensure tenants can remain in their homes, and capital investment. The green house shows that 29p in every pound is spent on what we refer to as neighbourhood services. This covers your locality housing teams, for example your housing officers, housing assistants, sheltered housing, our allocations, housing options and some aspects of our housing support service. The yellow house shows that we spend 24p in every pound financing debt. These are our loan charges for past and future borrowing costs for our capital programme. The red house shows our contribution, or CFCR, which is capital funded from current revenue. This is a budget within our revenue account which is set aside for any overspends, and any surplus is used to fund our capital borrowing. The final purple house shows that 8p in every pound is spent on support services. This is our corporate recharges for services out with housing such as legal, human resources, finance, business improvement and also our tenant participation costs. Some of you listening to this presentation today will be aware that we agreed some time ago, in partnership with tenants, what we refer to as our strategic tenant engagement around rent setting. This is referred to in the diagram here and shows how we will make sure that we listen to and fully engage with tenants around their priorities for rent spend and rent levels. The diagram here, the first bubble at the top, shows that in April 2021 we enclosed a questionnaire in the spring edition of On the House. In June 2021, we would normally have expected feedback as a result of the questionnaire, and we would have held a tenant conference, and further discussion would have taken place about rent levels and services. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we've not been able to do this year. So the survey every tenant was sent showed them a list of what the top priorities were based on our tenant satisfaction survey, and what they felt that this would look like for them as an individual tenant and what was important to them. In July and August, we would normally have had face-to-face network tenant events to engage as many tenants as possible around their priorities. At the present time, under the current COVID-19 restrictions and the Scottish Government guidance, this will not be possible. However, following on from the result of the rent settings survey, which will be discussed with you next week at the live online conference, we will look to gather information around the decision-making process in order for us in October 2021 at our autumn conference to be able to deliver you as tenants a range of genuine options for rent levels for 2022-23. This will also include what this means in terms of affordability, as we mentioned earlier in this presentation, but importantly, what that means in terms of service delivery for you as a tenant. And finally, in November-December 2021, we will send out a voting survey to every single tenant outlining the 3 genuine rent options which are available and asking for tenants' opinions on what their priority would be for rent levels for 2022-23. So finally, what happens next after you've listened to today's presentation? Well, next week we launch our online live Tenant Summer Conference on the 17th of June. This session will include a question and answer session with Housing Management Team. It will also include results from the rent setting survey priorities, which we spoke about earlier, and a presentation on how we're going to manage the backlog of routine housing repairs. So what do you need to do now? We would like you to send any questions you have for housing management to the email address below, and these will be answered on the day, where possible, on the 17th of June. We would also encourage you, if you've not already done so, to register for the tenant conference using the details included in this slide. It's really important that we get this message out to as many tenants as possible, so we would encourage you, if you're speaking to your neighbour who's a council tenant, to ask them, have they joined up for the survey, for the conference, and to take part and to forward questions. We look forward to seeing as many of you as possible on the 17th of June, and thank you so much for joining us to listen to this presentation and to participate in what is a key priority for you as tenants. On behalf of the Housing Management Team, we look forward to seeing you next week.